The massive ship appeared at the edge of human space without warning. It was bigger than anything humans had ever built, stretching 5 kilometers from nose to tail. Its black metal surface was covered in strange symbols that glowed with purple light. The ship moved slowly toward the Sol system, broadcasting a message in over 300 languages. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Station, watching the alien vessel approach. Her hands were steady, but her heart was beating fast. In all her years in space, she had never seen anything like this. The ship was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "Captain, we're getting their message," her communications officer said. "They're calling themselves the Galactic Empire. They want to talk to our leaders." Sarah nodded. "Send the message to Earth Command. Tell them we have visitors." The alien ship, which called itself the Eternal Dominion, stopped just outside Earth's moon. It sat there like a dark mountain in space, waiting. On Earth, world leaders gathered in emergency meetings. Scientists studied the ship with telescopes and sensors. Everyone had the same question. What did these aliens want? 3 days later, they got their answer. A smaller ship left the Eternal Dominion and flew to Luna Station, humanity's largest space facility near the moon. The ship was still huge by human standards, but it looked tiny next to its mothership. Ambassador Zektar stepped out of the alien craft with great ceremony. He was tall and thin, with blue skin and 4 arms. His clothes were made of materials that seemed to change color in the light. Behind him came a group of other aliens, all different species, all wearing similar clothes. The human delegation, waiting for them, was much simpler. Secretary General Maria Santos wore a plain black suit. She was a small woman in her 50s, with gray hair and kind eyes. But everyone who knew her understood that she was tough as steel underneath. "Welcome to Luna Station," Maria said as the aliens approached. "I'm Maria Santos, representing the people of Earth and our colonies." Zektar looked down at her with what might have been surprise. He had expected more ceremony, more fear. Instead, this small human woman stood calmly before him, not bowing, or showing any sign of being impressed by his grand entrance. "I am Ambassador Zektar of the Hegemony Council," he said in perfect English. His voice was deep and musical. "I speak for the Galactic Empire, ruler of 12,000 star systems and 847 species." Maria nodded politely. "That's quite impressive. Would you like to sit down? We have much to discuss." They moved to a conference room with large windows that showed Earth hanging in space. Zektar and his team sat on one side of a long table. Maria and her advisors sat on the other side. Between them were recording devices that would capture every word for history. "Let me explain why we are here," Zektar began. "The Galactic Empire has ruled this galaxy for over 10,000 years. We bring peace, order, and prosperity to all species. When we find a new species like yours, we offer them the chance to join our great civilization." "That sounds wonderful," Maria said. "What would joining mean for humanity?" Zektar smiled, showing sharp teeth. "Your species would be classified as Labor Class 7. This is actually quite good for such a young race. You would be allowed to keep your local governments, but all major decisions would be made by imperial administrators. Your military forces would be disbanded as the Empire provides all protection. And, of course, you would pay tribute to support the greater good." "What kind of tribute?" asked Dr. James Wright, humanities chief economist. 60% of your industrial output," Zektar said casually, "plus 40% of your agricultural production, and 20% of your population would be selected for imperial service. This is standard for all member species." The human delegation exchanged glances. Maria's face remained calm, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her pen. "See?" she said quietly. "And if we choose not to join your empire?" Zektar's smile faded. "That would be unfortunate. Non-member species in imperial space are considered hostile. They are dealt with accordingly." "Meaning?" "Meaning they cease to be a problem," one of the other aliens said. This one looked like a giant insect with glowing eyes. "The Empire has never failed to bring order to chaos." Maria sat back in her chair. She looked out the window at Earth, where 4 billion humans lived their lives, unaware that their future was being decided in this room. She thought about her daughter, who was studying to be a doctor. She thought about her grandson, who was only 3 years old and loved to play with toy spaceships. "How long do we have to decide?" she asked. "1 of your months," Zektar said. "This is very generous. Most species get only days." "We appreciate your generosity," Maria said. Her voice was still calm, but something had changed in her tone. However, I think there may be a misunderstanding here. The aliens looked confused. This was not how these meetings usually went. Most species either accepted immediately or begged for more time. What misunderstanding? Zektar asked. Maria stood up slowly. She walked to the window and looked out at Earth. The blue and white planet looked so peaceful from here. It was hard to imagine the struggles and wars and triumphs that had shaped humanity over thousands of years. You seem to think we're just another species you can push around, she said without turning around. You come here with your big ship and your threats, expecting us to roll over like frightened animals. She turned back to face the aliens. Her kind eyes had become hard as diamonds. But here's what you don't understand about humans. We've been fighting for survival since we first stood upright. We've survived ice ages that should have killed us. We've survived plagues that wiped out half our population. We've fought wars against each other that were so terrible, they should have ended our species. Zektar shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This was definitely not going as expected. And through it all, Maria continued, we learned one important lesson. Freedom isn't something you can give or take away. It's something you fight for. It's something you die for. She walked back to the table and placed both hands on it, leaning forward to look directly at Zektar. So here's humanity's answer to your generous offer. No. We will not join your empire. We will not pay your tribute. We will not give you our children. We will remain free. The room was dead silent. The aliens stared at her in shock. In 10,000 years of expansion, no species had ever refused so directly. But more importantly, Maria said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, I want you to take a message back to your Hegemony Council. Tell them that humanity tried to do this the easy way. We really don't want to fight you. We'd rather be friends. We'd rather trade and learn from each other and explore the galaxy together. She straightened up, and her voice became stronger. But if you insist on being our enemies, if you try to take our freedom by force, then you need to understand what you're getting into. We're not like the other species you've conquered. We don't give up. We don't surrender. We fight until we win or until we're all dead. Zektar found his voice. You cannot be serious. We control 12,000 systems. You have what, 40? Numbers don't tell the whole story, Maria said. Ask Napoleon. Ask Hitler. Ask anyone who thought they could break the human spirit. She moved toward the door, signaling that the meeting was over. Ambassador Zektar, you and your people are welcome to stay as our guests while you consider our words. But I suggest you think very carefully about what happens next. We've survived everything the universe has thrown at us so far. She paused at the door and looked back one last time. Don't test us. 6 months had passed since the meeting at Luna Station. Ambassador Zektar had returned to the Imperial capital with Maria Santos's message. The Hegemony Council had listened to his report with a mixture of amusement and irritation. They said, what? High Counselor Vexani had asked, her tentacles writhing with what the other species had learned to recognize as laughter. She was an ancient being from the depths of Kepler Prime, older than most civilizations. These humans think they can stand against the Empire? The exact words were, don't test us, Zektar had replied. He still felt uncomfortable remembering that meeting. Something about the human female's eyes had bothered him. How many ships do they have? Asked General Morduck, the Empire's military commander. He was a warrior from the Flame Worlds with red scales and burning eyes. Our intelligence says maybe 3,000 vessels total, Zektar answered. Most are small cargo ships or system defense craft. Nothing larger than their battlecruisers, which are primitive by our standards. The council chamber had filled with the sounds of alien laughter. 3,000 ships against the Empire's million-strong fleet. 40 systems against 12,000. 4 billion humans against the Empire's trillion citizens of hundreds of species. Begin standard compliance measures, High Counselor Vexani had ordered. These humans need to learn their place. Now, 6 months later, those compliance measures were in full effect. Imperial blockade ships sat at every jump point leading into human space. Human cargo vessels were stopped and searched. Any ship that didn't carry proper Imperial permits was seized. On the human colony world of New Kansas, Imperial troops had landed 3 weeks ago. They called it an administrative occupation, but everyone knew what it really meant. The Empire was sending a message. Captain Marcus Johnson walked through the streets of New Kansas City, watching the Imperial soldiers patrol in their power armor. The aliens moved in groups of 4, their weapons ready, their faces hidden behind dark visors. The human colonists went about their daily business, but the fear was obvious in their eyes. Marcus was supposed to be a farmer now. He had retired from the Earth Defense Force 5 years ago and come to New Kansas to grow wheat and raise cattle. But old habits died hard, and he found himself studying the Imperial troops like he used to study enemy positions. They were good soldiers, he had to admit, professional, disciplined. But they were occupying forces in a hostile land, and that meant they had weaknesses. They moved in predictable patterns. They relied too much on their technology. And most importantly, they didn't understand the people they were trying to control. His comm unit buzzed. A text message from his neighbor, Sarah Miller. Church meeting. Tonight, 7 o'clock, bring everyone. Marcus smiled grimly. There hadn't been a church meeting on New Kansas in months. The message meant something else entirely. At 7 o'clock, Marcus and 40 other farmers gathered in the old community center. They looked like ordinary colonists, men and women in work clothes with sun-weathered faces and calloused hands. But Marcus knew better. Half of them were retired military like himself. The others were engineers, doctors, teachers who had volunteered for special training when the Empire first made contact. Everyone here? Asked Sarah Miller. She was a small woman in her 60s who had once commanded a destroyer in the Titan Wars. Now she grew tomatoes and planned resistance operations. All present, Marcus replied. What's the word from Earth? Sarah activated a small device that would block Imperial listening equipment. Secretary General Santos sent new orders. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. The room was quiet. Everyone knew what Phase 2 meant. For 6 months, humanity had been preparing. While the Empire implemented their blockades and occupations, human colonies had been quietly transforming. Farms had become training camps. Factories had retooled their production lines. Civilian ships had been converted to carry weapons and supplies. Most importantly, humanity had awakened something the Empire didn't understand: the total war economy. Every human world was now focused on one goal: survival through strength. The Empire thinks we'll surrender when things get hard enough, Sarah continued. They're about to learn that making things hard for humans just makes us more dangerous. On Earth, Secretary General Santos stood in the war room deep beneath the United Nations building. The walls were covered with displays showing the positions of Imperial and human forces throughout known space. Red dots showed Imperial ships and bases. Blue dots showed human positions. The Reds outnumbered the Blues by more than 10 to 1. Status report, Santos said to Admiral Rebecca Foster, humanity's top military commander. All colonies report, ready for Phase 2, the Admiral replied. She was a tall woman with steel-gray hair and scars on her hands from the Battle of Europa. Our conversion programs are complete. Civilian infrastructure is now military infrastructure. Every world is a fortress, Santos nodded. For months, human colonies had been building underground factories, hidden weapon depots, and concealed communication networks. What looked like farming communities from orbit were actually military bases designed to resist occupation. What about our fleet? Santos asked. Hidden and ready, Admiral Foster said. The Empire thinks our ships are trapped by their blockades. They don't know about the deep space staging areas we've prepared. Santos walked to the main display. It showed the Proxima Centauri system, where the Empire had placed their largest blockade force. 300 Imperial ships surrounded the system, preventing any human vessel from entering or leaving. Send the message, Santos ordered. Across human space, the same message appeared on every communication network. It was broadcast on all frequencies, in every human language. Imperial forces intercepted it within minutes and sent copies to their commanders. The message was simple. To the Galactic Empire. For 6 months, you have blockaded our space, occupied our worlds, and threatened our people. We have asked you, repeatedly, to withdraw. You have refused. We gave you fair warning. You chose not to listen. As of 800 Universal Time tomorrow, humanity will no longer show restraint. This is your final chance to leave human space peacefully. After tomorrow, we will defend ourselves by any means necessary. We tried to avoid this. Don't say we didn't warn you. The message was signed by every human government, from Earth to the farthest colony world. On the Imperial capital world of Nexus Prime, the Hegemony Council met in emergency session. The message had reached them within hours, carried by the fastest ships in the Imperial fleet. Threats? General Mordek laughed, his scales glowing brighter with amusement. They're making threats? They can barely leave their own systems. Perhaps we should reconsider, suggested Counselor Yathara, a peaceful species from the outer rings. If they are this determined, maybe we should look for a diplomatic solution. Weakness, Mordak roared. The Empire does not negotiate with primitives. If these humans want a war, we'll give them a war they'll never forget. High Counselor Vexani raised one tentacle for silence. General, increase our forces in human space. Add another 1,000 ships to the blockades. Begin preparations for full-scale occupation of all human worlds. What about their threat? Zektar asked quietly. He had been studying human history since his return from Luna Station. What he had learned worried him. What about it? Vexani replied. They have no choice but to surrender. We control space around their worlds. Their ships cannot move without our permission. In a few more months, they will be begging to join the Empire. Zektar said nothing more, but privately he wondered if the Council truly understood what they were dealing with. He had read about human wars, conflicts where entire populations had fought to the death rather than surrender. He had learned about something humans called scorched earth tactics, where they destroyed everything rather than let enemies have it. Most disturbing of all, he had discovered that humans were the only known species that regularly fought wars against their own kind. Other species fought for territory or resources. Humans fought for ideas. They fought for freedom. They fought because they believed their cause was right. And now the Empire was about to find out what happened when you gave humans a cause they all believed in. On New Kansas, Captain Marcus Johnson received the message at the same time as everyone else. He read it twice, then walked outside to look up at the night sky. Somewhere up there, Imperial ships were preparing for what they thought would be an easy victory. He thought about his granddaughter back on Earth, only 8 years old, who wanted to be an astronaut when she grew up. He thought about the future humanity was fighting for, a future where humans could explore the galaxy as free people, not as slaves to an alien empire. Marcus went back inside and opened a hidden compartment in his basement. Inside were weapons, communication gear, and detailed maps of Imperial positions on New Kansas. Tomorrow, the gloves would come off. The Empire was about to learn why humans had a saying, "Don't poke the bear." But first, they would learn what happened when you ignored a human warning. The war began at exactly 800 Universal Time, just as humanity had promised. Admiral Vorthak was drinking his morning stimulant in his command center above New Kansas when the first explosion lit up the pre-dawn sky. He was a veteran of 30 successful campaigns, a proud warrior from the Crystal Worlds whose victories had brought dozens of species into the Empire. This assignment was supposed to be easy, a simple occupation of a farming world populated by primitive humans. The explosion came from Sector 7, where his ground forces had established their main supply depot. A massive fireball rose into the sky, followed by smaller explosions as ammunition and fuel supplies went up in chain reactions. "Report," Vorthak barked into his communication device. "Supply Depot 7 has been destroyed, Admiral," came the panicked reply from his ground commander. "We're under attack from multiple directions. They came out of nowhere." Vorthak moved to his tactical display. According to Imperial intelligence, New Kansas had a population of 200,000 farmers and ranchers. The local militia numbered maybe 500 poorly equipped civilians. His own forces included 10,000 elite Imperial troops with the best weapons and armor in the galaxy. "How many attackers?" he asked. "Unknown, sir. They hit us with explosives, then disappeared. We're tracking at least 50 separate groups moving through the countryside." 50 groups. Vorthak did quick calculations. Even if each group had 20 fighters, that was only 1,000 people. His forces should be able to handle that easily. But as the morning wore on, things got worse instead of better. The humans weren't fighting like any enemy he had faced before. They didn't form battle lines or hold territory. They struck fast and hard, then melted away before his troops could respond. A convoy of Imperial vehicles would be destroyed by a roadside bomb. When reinforcements arrived, they found nothing but wreckage and empty fields. A communication tower would be blown up by fighters who vanished into the forest before air support could arrive. Supply trucks disappeared entirely, their crews found dead and their cargo missing. "Sir, we're losing equipment faster than we can replace it," his logistics officer reported, and the attackers seemed to know exactly when and where we're moving supplies. Vorthak studied the reports flowing in from across New Kansas. Every Imperial position was under attack. His forces were spread across the planet, trying to maintain control of major cities and infrastructure. But the humans were everywhere, else moving freely through territory he thought he controlled. "Bring in the reserves," he ordered. "Deploy the seeker drones. Find these terrorists and eliminate them." The seeker drones were advanced hunting machines, designed to track down enemy forces using heat sensors and movement detectors. They had never failed to locate hidden enemies. But on New Kansas, something strange happened. The drones found heat signatures everywhere, in barns, in houses, in underground shelters. But when Imperial troops arrived to investigate, they found only frightened civilians, old farmers, women with children, people who claimed to know nothing about any attacks. What Vorthak didn't understand was that on New Kansas, there was no difference between civilians and fighters. Every farmer was a trained soldier, every teacher was a saboteur, every grandmother was an intelligence operative. The entire population was the resistance. Captain Marcus Johnson crouched in a wheat field, watching an Imperial patrol walk past his position. He was covered in mud and grass, invisible to their sensors. His team of 12 farmers waited in the irrigation ditches, weapons ready. The Imperial soldiers moved in standard formation, 4 troops in a diamond pattern, weapons scanning for threats. They were well trained and disciplined. But they were also predictable. Marcus waited until they were exactly where he wanted them, then triggered the signal. The wheat field exploded in 12 different places as buried mines went off simultaneously. The Imperial patrol was wiped out in seconds. Before the smoke cleared, Marcus and his team were already moving to their next position. They had 3 more targets to hit before dawn, and then they would disappear back into the farming community where they had lived for years. This was happening all across New Kansas. The Empire's occupation force was fighting ghosts, enemies who knew every rock, every tree, every hiding place on the planet they called home. But New Kansas was just one world, and Admiral Vorthak was just one Imperial commander. Across human space, similar scenes were playing out on every occupied planet. On New Britannia, human resistance fighters had somehow gotten their hands on Imperial weapons and were using them against their former owners. On New Texas, the entire population had vanished into underground tunnel systems that didn't appear on any Imperial map. On New Canada, Imperial patrols were being picked off one by snipers who could hit targets from impossible distances. The worst part from the Imperial perspective was that they couldn't tell who was fighting and who was innocent. Every human looked like a potential enemy. Every building could hide weapons. Every smiling face could belong to someone planning their next attack. But the real shock was yet to come. Admiral Korvex commanded the Imperial blockade fleet around the Proxima Centauri system. His 300 ships formed a perfect sphere around the system's jump points, preventing any human vessel from entering or leaving. It was, according to Imperial doctrine, an unbreakable blockade. Korvex was reviewing patrol reports when his sensor officer called out in alarm. "Admiral, contacts emerging from hyperspace. Multiple contacts." Korvex looked at his tactical display and felt his blood freeze. 40 human warships had just appeared inside his blockade as if they had materialized out of empty space. "How did they get past our sensors?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir. They're not using any jump point we're monitoring." The human ships were smaller than Imperial vessels, but there were more of them than intelligence reports had suggested, and they were moving with purpose, spreading out to attack the blockade from multiple angles. "All ships, battle stations," Korvex ordered. "Destroy the human fleet." The Battle of Proxima began with the Empire's ships firing massive energy beams at the approaching human vessels. The humans responded with swarms of missiles and kinetic projectiles. Their ships moved in patterns the Imperial computers couldn't predict, weaving through space like dancers performing some deadly ballet. What Admiral Korvex couldn't know was that every human ship was commanded by someone who had grown up playing 3-dimensional strategy games. They thought in terms of complex maneuvers and surprise attacks. More importantly, they were willing to sacrifice their ships to destroy larger Imperial vessels. The first human ship to die was the destroyer Patrick Henry. Its captain, Commander Sarah Kim, deliberately rammed her vessel into an Imperial battlecruiser after her weapons systems were destroyed. Both ships were vaporized in the collision, but the battlecruiser had carried 3,000 Imperial troops. The Patrick Henry had carried 200 humans who had volunteered for a suicide mission. The math was simple and brutal. The Empire couldn't afford to trade ships and lives at that rate. As the battle raged, more human fleets appeared at other systems. They struck Imperial supply bases, destroyed communication relays, and attacked isolated patrol ships. The Empire's perfect blockade was falling apart. On the Imperial capital world of Nexus Prime, the Hegemony Council watched in growing alarm as reports flooded in from across human space. How many ships have we lost? High Counselor Vexani asked. General Mordak's scales had lost their usual bright glow. 47 vessels destroyed, 18 severely damaged, and that's just in the last 6 hours. What about our ground forces? Under constant attack on every occupied world. Our troops are requesting immediate reinforcement. Vexani's tentacles writhed with anxiety. In 10,000 years of Imperial expansion, they had never faced resistance like this. Other species might fight for a while, but they always eventually saw a reason. They recognized the futility of resisting the Empire's overwhelming power, but humans didn't seem to understand the concept of futility. How are they doing this? Counselor Yathara asked. Our intelligence said they had limited military capability. Our intelligence was wrong, admitted Zektar. They've been preparing for this war for months, maybe years. Every civilian facility was actually a hidden military base. Every cargo ship was a disguised warship. Every farmer was a trained soldier. Impossible, General Mordak roared. No species could maintain that level of deception. But the evidence was undeniable. Humanity had turned their entire civilization into a weapon pointed at the Empire. They had planned for total war and prepared for it in ways the Empire couldn't understand. Most disturbing of all were the intercepted human communications. Imperial cryptographers had broken their encryption codes and were listening to their military chatter. What they heard chilled them to the bone. Human commanders weren't just fighting to win battles. They were fighting to send a message to the entire galaxy. They wanted every species under Imperial rule to see that the Empire could be beaten. They were willing to die to prove that freedom was possible. One message sent from a human commander whose ship was being destroyed had become legendary among Imperial intelligence officers. Tell the Empire we're just getting started. This is what happens when you mess with humans. We don't surrender, we don't quit. We win or we die. 2 years into the war, the Galactic Empire was learning what fear meant. Grand Admiral Thexmal stood in the Imperial War Room on Nexus Prime, staring at the tactical display that showed the entire galaxy. Red dots marked Imperial positions. Blue dots showed human forces. 2 years ago, there had been 40 small blue dots surrounded by thousands of red ones. Now the blue dots had multiplied and spread like an infection across dozens of star systems. Report on the Kepler sector, Thexmal ordered. He was the Empire's greatest military mind. A strategist who had conquered entire civilizations with carefully planned campaigns, but humans didn't fight like any civilization he had ever faced. Lost, sir, replied Intelligence Chief Cordon, his voice hollow with exhaustion. The human fleet hit our supply depot at Kepler 442b yesterday. Admiral, Forthak's entire task force was destroyed. Thexmal closed his eyes. That was the third fleet lost this month. How many ships? 287 Imperial vessels destroyed. The humans lost maybe 15 ships. The numbers made no sense. By every military principle Thexmal understood, the humans should have been crushed months ago. The Empire had more ships, better weapons, larger armies. They controlled the industrial might of 12,000 star systems. But humans fought differently. They fought like creatures possessed by madness, willing to sacrifice everything for victory. Worse, they fought smart. Explain how they destroyed a fleet of 300 ships with 15 vessels. Thexmal demanded. Cordon activated a holographic replay of the battle. They didn't attack the fleet directly, sir. They attacked the asteroid field surrounding Kepler 442b. Our sensors detected the human ships approaching, and Admiral Vorthak moved his fleet to intercept them. The hologram showed Imperial ships pursuing the smaller human vessels into a dense asteroid field. It looked like a classic trap. The humans were cornered with nowhere to run. But the humans had been planning this for months, Cordon continued. They had hidden fusion mines throughout the asteroid field. When our fleet reached the optimal position, they triggered everything at once. The hologram exploded in brilliant light as hundreds of hidden mines detonated simultaneously. The asteroid field became a storm of nuclear fire and flying debris. Most of the Imperial fleet was vaporized instantly. The few ships that survived were picked off by the human vessels as they tried to escape. Admiral Vorthak's final message was disturbing, Cordon added quietly. Show me. The hologram changed to show the bridge of Vorthak's flagship during its final moments. The proud admiral looked broken and terrified as explosions lit up the space around his ship. They're not fighting for territory or resources, Vorthak said, his voice cracking with panic. They're fighting for the right to exist free. Every human will die before they surrender, and they're taking us with them. The message ended as, the flagship exploded. Thexmal studied the tactical display again. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The Empire was losing this war. Not just battles. They were losing the war itself. In 2 years of fighting, Imperial forces had failed to hold a single human world. Every occupation attempt had turned into a nightmare of guerrilla warfare. Human civilians fought as fiercely as their soldiers. Entire populations would rather die than accept Imperial rule. Worse, the war was spreading beyond human space. Other species were watching, and some were getting ideas. There had been rebellions in the Outer Rim territories. 3 client species had declared independence. The Empire's reputation for invincibility was cracking. What about our latest intelligence on human capabilities? Thexmal asked. Cordan looked uncomfortable. Sir, we may have seriously underestimated their industrial capacity. Our spies report that every human world has been converted to military production. They're building ships faster than we can destroy them. This was the most frightening development of all. Human technology wasn't more advanced than Imperial equipment, but it was designed for one purpose: killing efficiently and in large numbers. Their ships were smaller but faster. Their weapons were less sophisticated but more reliable. Everything they built was optimized for war. How is that possible? Intelligence said they were primarily an agricultural and commercial civilization. That was before the war, sir. Now they've mobilized their entire society. Every factory, every mine, every farm serves the war effort. It's like their whole species has become a single military unit. Thexmal had read about this concept in ancient military histories. Total war, where an entire civilization becomes focused on fighting. The Empire had never faced anything like it because most species valued their own lives too much to make such sacrifices. But humans seemed to view death as just another tactical option. A new message arrived from the front lines. Thexmal read it and felt his confidence crumble further. The humans have captured the Rigel shipyards, he announced to his staff. They're using our own facilities to build more ships. The room fell silent. The Rigel shipyards had been defended by a full Imperial battle fleet. How had the humans taken such a heavily fortified position? The answer came in the next intelligence report. The humans had loaded an old cargo ship with nuclear explosives and crashed it into the shipyard's main defensive platform. The explosion had been so massive that it knocked out the defensive systems across the entire facility. Then human assault ships had stormed the yards while the defenders were still stunned. The cargo ship had been piloted by volunteers who knew it was a suicide mission. They had flown straight into certain death, smiling and singing human war songs. What kind of species fought like that? On the human world of New Earth, Secretary General Maria Santos stood in a bunker deep underground, surrounded by maps and tactical displays. 2 years of war had aged her, but her eyes still burned with the same determination she had shown at Luna Station. Status report on the Rigel operation, she said to Admiral Foster. Complete success, the Admiral replied. We now control 3 major Imperial shipyards and have captured enough equipment to build 50 new vessels, but the cost was heavy. We lost 800 volunteers in the attack. Santos nodded grimly. Every human death was a tragedy, but they were fighting for the survival of their species. The Empire had made it clear that humanity had 2 choices: serve as slaves or die as free people. Humans had chosen to die free, but they were going to take as many Imperial ships with them as possible. What's our intelligence on Imperial morale? Santos asked. Collapsing, ma'am. We're intercepting communications that suggest many Imperial commanders are requesting reassignment away from human space. Some client species are questioning whether the Empire is as invincible as they claimed. This was exactly what Santos had hoped for. Humanity couldn't win a straight military victory against the entire Empire, but they could show the galaxy that the Empire could be beaten. They could inspire other species to fight for their freedom. And our losses? Admiral Foster's expression darkened. We've lost 60% of our original fleet and 40% of our trained personnel, but our industrial capacity is now triple what it was before the war. We're replacing ships faster than ever. Santos walked to a wall display showing Earth. The blue and white planet looked peaceful from space, but she knew that every city, every town, every farm was now dedicated to the war effort. Children learned mathematics by calculating ballistic trajectories. Artists designed camouflage patterns. Musicians composed marching songs for troops heading into battle. Humanity had become a weapon forged by necessity and tempered by determination. There's something else, ma'am, Admiral Foster said quietly. We're getting messages from other species. Some want to join our fight against the Empire. Santos felt a spark of hope. This was what they had dreamed of. Other species inspired by humanity's example to fight for their own freedom. How many? 7 species so far. They're small civilizations, mostly in the outer rim, but they're willing to fight. Santos nodded. Send them our tactical manuals. Share our intelligence. If they want to be free, we'll help them learn how to fight. Back on Nexus Prime, Grand Admiral Thexamol was receiving similar reports about species rebellion. The human war had become a symbol across the galaxy. Freedom was possible. The Empire could be resisted. Sir, Intelligence Chief Cordon said urgently. We're receiving a new communication from the humans. It's being broadcast on all frequencies across the galaxy. Show me. The main display activated to show Secretary General Santos standing before a backdrop of human and alien flags. She looked directly into the camera, and her words carried the weight of 2 years of desperate warfare. To all species under Imperial rule, she said, humanity sends greetings and hope. 2 years ago, the Galactic Empire told us to surrender our freedom or face destruction. We chose to fight. Today, we still fight, and we are winning. The display switched to show footage of destroyed Imperial ships, captured bases, and human forces advancing through former Imperial territory. The Empire wants you to believe they are invincible, Santos continued. They want you to think resistance is hopeless. But we are proof that freedom is possible. We are proof that courage can defeat oppression. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. To every species that dreams of freedom, to every being that refuses to kneel, we say this. Stand up. Fight back. 4 years after the war began, High Counselor Vexani sat alone in her private chambers on Nexus Prime, staring at reports that should have been impossible. The Galactic Empire, ruler of 12,000 star systems for 10 millennia, was losing a war to a species they had dismissed as primitive farmers. The numbers were devastating. Over 3,000 Imperial ships destroyed, 17 major military bases captured or destroyed, 43 client species in open rebellion, and worst of all, the human fleet had grown from a few hundred ships to over 2,000 vessels, many built in captured Imperial shipyards. But it wasn't just the military losses that frightened her. It was what the war meant for the Empire's future. A soft chime announced a visitor. Ambassador Zektar entered, looking older and more tired than she remembered. He had spent the last year traveling to various sectors, trying to calm rebellious species and shore up Imperial authority. From his expression, the news wasn't good. Report, Vexani said wearily. The Andorian sector has declared independence, Zektar said without preamble. The Crystalline Confederation is refusing to pay tribute. The Hive worlds are demanding representation on the Hegemony Council. Vexani's tentacles curled in distress. Because of the humans? Because of what the humans have shown is possible, Zektar corrected. Every species in the galaxy has watched this war. They've seen that the Empire can be beaten. They've seen that resistance isn't suicide. He activated a holographic display showing the current state of Imperial territory. Red areas showed secure Imperial control. Yellow areas indicated unrest or rebellion. Blue areas were controlled by human forces or their allies. The display was a patchwork of colors, with far too much yellow and blue. How many species are now in active rebellion? Vexani asked. 87, Zektar replied, with more declaring independence every week. The silence stretched between them. Both understood what these numbers meant. The Empire was falling apart. Not from military defeat, but from the collapse of the fear that had held it together for centuries. What do our military advisors recommend? Vexani asked. General Mordak wants to deploy planet-killer weapons against human worlds. He believes that the complete destruction of their species will end the rebellions and restore Imperial authority. Vexani considered this. It would certainly send a message to other rebellious species, but it would also prove that the Empire's talk of bringing civilization to the galaxy was nothing but propaganda. They would be revealed as conquerors who destroyed entire species when they couldn't control them. And if we do that, what happens to our remaining loyal species? How do we justify ruling them after we commit genocide? Zektar nodded grimly. Exactly. We would become what the humans have always said we are, tyrants who rule through terror alone. The Empire would survive, but it would be forever changed. Another chime announced an urgent message from the front lines. Vexani read it and felt her heart sink. The human fleet has reached the core worlds, she announced. They're attacking Imperial territory that hasn't seen war in 5,000 years. The core worlds were the Empire's industrial heartland, protected by massive fleets and defensive installations. If humans could strike there, nowhere in Imperial space was safe. How is that possible? Zektar asked. The same way they've accomplished everything else in this war, Vexani replied bitterly. They fight in ways we don't expect, using tactics we don't understand, motivated by beliefs we can't comprehend. She called up the tactical report from the core world attacks. Human forces hadn't tried to conquer territory or destroy major installations. Instead, they had targeted symbolic locations, government buildings, military academies, monuments to imperial glory. Their message was clear. The Empire couldn't protect even its most sacred sites. But the most disturbing part wasn't what the humans had destroyed. It was what they had left behind. On every world they attacked, human forces had broadcast the same message. Freedom is possible. Resistance works. Join us and we will help you throw off your chains. And species across the core worlds were listening. Meanwhile, on the human world of New Terra, Secretary General Maria Santos stood before the combined Human Council, addressing leaders from every human world and colony. 4 years of war had changed her from a diplomat into a war leader, but she had never lost sight of what they were fighting for. My fellow humans, she began, 4 years ago we were given a choice: submit to slavery or fight for freedom. Today, I can report that we have not only survived, but we are winning. The chamber erupted in applause, but Santos raised her hand. For silence. But victory in battle is not enough. We must win the peace that follows. We must help create a galaxy where all species can live free from tyranny. She activated a display showing the current state of the war. Human forces now controlled nearly 200 star systems. More importantly, they had inspired rebellions across half the galaxy. The Empire's power was built on a lie: that resistance was hopeless, that freedom was impossible. We have proven that lie false. But now we must show the galaxy what freedom looks like. Admiral Foster stepped forward with the latest intelligence reports. Ma'am, we're receiving communications from Imperial sources. It appears there's a growing peace faction within the Hegemony Council. They're questioning whether this war can be won. Santos nodded. This was what she had been hoping for. Humans couldn't conquer the entire Galactic Empire, but they could make the cost of ruling through fear too high to sustain. What are our terms for peace? Asked Counselor Chen from New Beijing. Simple, Santos replied. Complete recognition of human independence. Withdrawal of all Imperial forces from human space. Reparations for the worlds they occupied. And most importantly, a guarantee of self-determination for any species that wants independence from the Empire. The room was quiet as the implications sank in. These weren't just terms for ending the war with humanity. They were terms that would fundamentally change how the galaxy was governed. Will the Empire accept such terms? Asked Counselor Okafor from New Lagos. They will, Santos said with quiet confidence, because the alternative is watching their empire collapse completely. Every day this war continues, more species rebel. Every Imperial defeat inspires new resistance movements. The Empire can keep fighting us, but they can't fight the idea we represent. Back on Nexus Prime, that same realization was dawning on the Imperial leadership. Grand Admiral Thexmal had just delivered his final report on the military situation. The war cannot be won, he stated flatly to the assembled Hegemony Council. We can continue fighting, but we cannot achieve victory. The humans have turned this from a military conflict into an ideological revolution. General Mordak slammed his fist on the council table. We are the Galactic Empire. We do not surrender to primitives. These are not primitives, Thexmal replied, calmly. They are a species that has spent their entire evolution learning how to fight against superior forces. They are not fighting for conquest. They are fighting for survival. And a species fighting for survival will never surrender. Counselor Yathara, who had opposed the war from the beginning, spoke up. What do you recommend, Grand Admiral? Peace, Thexmal said, before we lose everything we have built over 10,000 years. The debate that followed would determine the future of the galaxy. Some counselors wanted to continue fighting, believing that Imperial power could eventually crush the human rebellion. Others recognized that the war had already changed everything, that the old empire of fear and submission was dying whether they won or lost. Finally, High Counselor Vexani called for silence. Send a message to the human leadership, she ordered. Tell them we are willing to discuss terms for ending this conflict. 3 months later, representatives from the Galactic Empire and humanity met aboard a neutral space station in the Vega system. The negotiations were broadcast across the galaxy. watched by trillions of beings who had never seen their rulers forced to treat with equals. Secretary General Santos sat across from High Counselor Vexani, two leaders who had been enemies, but now sought peace. Between them lay the future of galactic civilization. The Empire offers the following terms, Vexani began. Recognition of human independence in your current territory. Establishment of formal diplomatic relations. Mutual non-aggression agreements. Santos shook her head. Not enough. This war was never just about humanity. It was about the right of all species to determine their own fate. She placed her own proposal on the table. Complete imperial withdrawal from human space. Reparations for occupied worlds. Recognition of the right of self-determination for all imperial client species. And the establishment of a galactic council where all species have equal representation. The terms were breathtaking in their scope. They would effectively end the empire as it had existed for millennia. Impossible, Vexani said. You ask us to dissolve our entire civilization. I ask you to evolve it, Santos replied. The empire based on fear and conquest is dying. You can be part of building something better, or you can watch it collapse around you. The negotiations continued for weeks. In the end, the empire agreed to most of humanity's demands. They had no choice. The alternative was complete collapse. As more species rebelled and the imperial military exhausted itself fighting an unwinnable,